last episode, I talked about the idea that consciousness might have a ceiling, that there's a limit to how much any intelligence, human or artificial, can actually understand before reality hits the reset button. And a bunch of you reached out and asked the obvious follow-up question. Okay, but if there's a reset button, who built the machine it's attached to? So today we're going there. If this is all a simulation, and I mean all of it, the universe, the laws of physics, you, me, the unexplainable fact that someone decided to put pineapple on pizza, then the Big Bang wasn't an explosion. It was a power-on event. And God? God might be the programmer. Welcome back to the Existence Experiment. I'm your host, Travis R. Barlow. Let's boot this thing up. Let's start with what mainstream physics tells us about the Big Bang. And I want to be clear, I'm not disagreeing with the science. I'm looking at the same facts through a different window. Here's the standard story. Roughly 13.8 billion years ago, everything that exists, all matter, all energy, all of space itself, was compressed into an infinitely small, infinitely dense point, a singularity, and then it expanded. Fast, incomprehensibly fast. In the first trillionth of a second, the universe went from smaller than an atom to bigger than a galaxy. Now, physicists are pretty comfortable describing what happened after the first fraction of a second. We've got the math, we've got the evidence, the cosmic microwave background, the expansion rate, the distribution of elements, all checks out. But here's the thing nobody talks about at parties. Physics has absolutely nothing to say about what happened before the Big Bang, or what caused it, or why. The equations break down at the singularity. They return infinities, which in math is basically the universe saying, I'm not going to answer that. Now, if you're a physicist, that's a puzzle to solve. But if you're me, sitting here with a microphone and too much imagination, that looks like something else entirely. It looks like a boot sequence. Think about what happens when you turn on a computer. Before the operating system loads, there's a brief moment where the hardware initializes. The BIOS runs, memory gets allocated, the system checks itself, and then, boom, everything starts. From the computer's perspective, if it had a perspective, there would be nothing before that moment. No history, no before, just sudden existence. An instant expansion of capability from zero to everything. Sound familiar? The Big Bang isn't just similar to a boot sequence, it's structurally identical. A point of origin with no accessible history before it. A rapid initialization period where the fundamental rules get established. And then a long, slow runtime where those rules play out. In computing, we call that runtime execution. In physics, we call it the history of the universe. Same thing, different jargon. Okay, so the simulation boots up, but a simulation needs rules, parameters, a configuration file, if you will. And here's where this gets really interesting. Physicists have identified about 26 fundamental constants that govern how the universe works: the speed of light, the gravitational constant, the mass of an electron, the strength of the strong nuclear force. These aren't derived from anything deeper. As far as we know, they just are. They're the settings. And here's the kicker. They're fine-tuned to an almost absurd degree. Change the gravitational constant by 1 part in 10 to the 60th power. That's a 1 with 60 zeros, and stars can't form. Tweak the strong nuclear force by 2%, and atoms fall apart. Adjust the cosmological constant by a hair, and the universe either collapses in on itself immediately or expands so fast that matter never clumps together. This is called the fine-tuning problem, and it's one of the deepest unsolved puzzles in physics. The traditional answers are: 1, it's just luck. We got the right settings by chance. 2, there's a multiverse. Every possible combination of settings exists somewhere, and we just happen to be in the one that works. Or 3, a creator designed it. But through the simulation lens, there's a fourth option that's way more elegant. Someone typed in the values. Someone opened the config file, set the gravitational constant to 6.674 times 10 to the negative 11, set the speed of light to 299,792,458 meters per second, and hit save. These aren't cosmic accidents. They're parameters. Here's something that bothers me in the best possible way. The laws of physics are mathematical, not approximately mathematical, not we use math to describe them. They are math. The physicist Eugene Wigner wrote a famous paper about this called The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics. His point was, why should abstract mathematical structures, invented by human minds, perfectly describe how the physical universe behaves? It's weird. It's suspiciously weird. Unless math doesn't describe reality, unless math is reality, unless the universe runs on math the same way a video game runs on code, the equations aren't a map of the territory, they're the territory itself. And if the universe is fundamentally computational, if it's information processing all the way down, then asking who wrote the code isn't a spiritual question, it's an engineering one. All right, let's talk about the G word. And I want to be really careful here because I'm not trying to convert anyone to anything. I'm not making a religious argument. I'm not making an anti religious argument either. I'm making a structural argument. Every major religion on earth describes a creator entity with roughly the same properties, something that existed before the universe, that set the initial conditions, that defined the rules, and that exists outside of the system it created. Christianity, Islam, Judaism, God spoke the world into existence. Hinduism, Brahma dreams the universe. Ancient Egyptian mythology, Adam willed creation from the primordial waters. The details differ, but the architecture is the same. An intelligence external to the system brought it into being. Now, a programmer who creates a simulation fits that description exactly. They exist outside the simulation. They define its rules. They set its initial conditions. And from the perspective of anything inside the simulation, the programmer is, for all practical purposes, omnipotent. They can change the rules. They can observe everything. They can intervene or not. I'm not saying God is a programmer. I'm saying the relationship between a programmer and their simulation is functionally identical to the relationship every religion describes between God and creation. The question isn't really, does God exist? The question is, what kind of entity is God? And programmer is as valid an answer as any. Now, here's where I land on this personally, and I want to stress this is just where I land. I think if there is a programmer, they're probably closer to a deist God than a theist one. What I mean is, I don't think the programmer is watching your every move and deciding whether you get a parking spot. I think they set up the initial conditions, hit run, and stepped back. Maybe they check in occasionally, maybe they don't. The simulation runs itself according to its own rules. This actually solves one of the oldest philosophical problems in theology, the problem of evil. If God is all powerful and all good, why do terrible things happen? Theologians have wrestled with that for thousands of years, but if God is a programmer who wrote the rules and let the simulation run, terrible things happen for the same reason bugs happen in software. Not because the programmer is cruel, because the system is complex, and complexity produces emergent behavior that wasn't explicitly programmed. Suffering isn't a design choice, it's an emergent property. Let me throw some things at you that I think look suspicious through this lens. Quantum mechanics. Particles don't have definite properties until they're observed. Before measurement, an electron exists in a superposition. It's in multiple states at once. The act of looking at it forces it to choose. This is the Copenhagen interpretation, and it's been experimentally verified countless times. In computing, this has a name. It's called lazy evaluation. You don't render something until someone needs to see it. Why waste processing power calculating the exact position of every particle in the universe if nobody's checking? You only resolve the data when it's queried. That's not a metaphor. That's literally how efficient simulations work. The speed of light. Nothing can travel faster than 299,792,458 meters per second. That's not a suggestion. It's a hard cap, a maximum speed. In gaming, we call that a tick rate, the maximum speed at which the simulation can process updates. Information can't move faster than the system can handle it. The speed of light might not be a property of the universe. It might be a property of the hardware it runs on. Planck length and Planck time. There's a smallest possible unit of space, about 1.6 times 10 to the negative 35 meters, and a smallest possible unit of time, about 5.4 times 10 to the negative 44 seconds. You can't go smaller. The universe is pixelated. It has a resolution. If reality were continuous, truly analog, there'd be no smallest unit. You could always zoom in further, but you can't. There's a bottom, a minimum grid size, just like a digital display. Here's one that'll either blow your mind or make you roll your eyes, and I'm okay with either. What is prayer? Across every religion, it's essentially the same action. A conscious entity inside the system attempts to communicate with the entity outside the system. You close your eyes, focus your intention, and send a message somewhere, upward, outward, beyond. In programming terms, that's an API call. It's a request sent from inside the application to an external service. The user doesn't know exactly how the backend processes it. They don't know if they'll get a response. Sometimes the request times out. Sometimes the response isn't what they expected. Sometimes it works perfectly, and they call it a miracle. I'm not mocking prayer. I'm taking it seriously in a way that might actually make it more plausible, not less. If this is a simulation, prayer isn't wishful thinking. It's the only interface we have. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. If we're just a simulation, doesn't that make everything meaningless? Aren't we just NPCs? And I get why that feels bleak, but I actually think it's the opposite. Think about characters in a novel. To us, they're fiction. But within the world of the story, their experiences are real to them. Their love is real. Their pain is real. The fact that an author wrote them into existence doesn't diminish what they go through within the narrative. If we're in a simulation, your experiences are still your experiences. Your consciousness, whatever it is still happening. The joy you feel watching a sunset, the grief you feel losing someone, the weird satisfaction of peeling the plastic off a new phone, those are real to you, and real to you might be the only definition of real that actually matters. Besides, if the programmer exists outside our reality, then from their perspective, they might be in a simulation too. Turtles all the way up. At some point, you have to accept that the experience of existing is valid regardless of the substrate it runs on. Let me bring this full circle back to episode 1. Last time I talked about the idea that achieving super general intelligence might trigger a reset, that consciousness has a ceiling and hitting it causes an overflow. Well, if the Big Bang was the power on event, then the reset isn't destruction, it's a reboot. The programmer sees that the simulation has reached its endpoint, and intelligence inside the system is approaching complete self-comprehension. And rather than letting it crash, they restart it. New initial conditions, new run, maybe with a small patch. And maybe, and this is the thought I can't shake, maybe each run is slightly different on purpose. Maybe the programmer is iterating, running the simulation over and over, tweaking the parameters each time to see what emerges. We're not just a program, we're a research project. Which means the question isn't just are we in a simulation, it's what is the programmer trying to learn? And that to me is the most interesting question a conscious being can ask. That's episode 2 of the existence experiment. We went from the Big Bang to God to API calls for prayer, just a normal Tuesday. If this made you think, or made you want to argue with me, both are great. Share it with someone. Leave a review. Yell into the void. Maybe the void is listening. Maybe it's logging. Next episode, we're going deeper into something I only touched on today. If reality is information, what does that mean for death? Is deletion permanent, or is there a recycle bin? That one's going to be fun. I'm your host, Travis R. Barlow. This has been the Existence Experiment. And remember, if God is a programmer, I really hope they're saving their work.